Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. On the phone with me today, I have Nissar Ahamed in Toronto, Canada. Nissar is the founder and CEO of career website careermetis.com. Nissar also hosts the Career Insider podcast. Nissar, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Angela, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, I am excited to talk to you today about unconventional job searching. And, very often when we are looking for a job, companies will tell us as job seekers, they'll say, apply online, and if you're a good fit, we'll call you. I'm curious from your perspective, why or why not should we really be listening to them? And if not, why not?
So there's a couple of questions here, right? Should we listen to the way the companies want us to apply, and the second question is, should are job boards and online applications still valid?
Mm-hmm.
I will answer the second one first. So I would say that job boards and online applications and applying through websites are still valid. It's not an avenue that job seekers should ignore. And the reason why is, if you listen to a lot of the advice from a lot of our peers, they would say, don't apply to job boards, just network your way. But networking is not easy, especially depending on your situation. If you're a new grad or you're coming to a new city, one of the advantages of job boards is that you come across companies that you never knew existed. Everybody has a dream list. Everybody wants to work for Google, of course. But there are companies that you might come across if it is not for job boards and applications. So they are really, really valid. Almost all the jobs I've had and all the clients I have right now, I found them through a job board. I never knew they existed. And some of the jobs I really, really enjoyed it. I built my career there. So it is valid. But should they rely completely or solely on them? That's something I would say not necessarily, because what happens with the job board is there's a good chance that your resume might not even reach the hiring manager. There are two gatekeepers. First of all, there's a robot. It's called an applicant tracking system or a resume parser or whatever you call them. What it does is it screens through your resume, looks for the keywords, and right away it's a simple yes and no. It either puts you in a no bucket or a yes bucket. Sometimes you get a rejection notice even before a human has received it. So there you go. So you might be a really good fit. And if you're given a chance to sit in front of a hiring manager, you have a chance, but you don't even get a chance because of that. And second thing, the second gatekeeper is, of course, recruiters and hiring managers. Sorry, human resources. They are like the central source of hiring for a lot of companies, and most cases they don't necessarily understand the ins and outs of the role. So, for example, a sales role. The person who really understands the role the better is the hiring manager. The human resources might have some bias, or they might have some things that they're looking to screen out. Their job is to screen out candidates. So so that's the second gatekeeper why you may not be able to get a call back or an interview. So what is the solution? The solution is you have there's a tool called LinkedIn, which I'm sure everybody's heard of, and people do not leverage it enough. You are able to build your brand, build your connections. You're also able to talk to others in the company and see if you can get a way in. The long story short, the summary I'm trying to say is the fastest way to get in front of in front of other candidates is to get to the hiring manager faster, either through your network or LinkedIn. So that's what I would say, and I call that an unconventional job search methodology, where you're not just hoping, you're actually being very proactive.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. This is my favorite job search method. And I think there's a couple things that you mentioned I would like to touch on. One of them is you talked about using job boards to just learn about jobs. I totally agree. I mean, you can't find every job by word of mouth. I mean, sometimes you maybe find that there's a job at a company that you really like, and maybe you have contacts there, but you maybe see it on LinkedIn or Indeed, but then perhaps you take another path to actually get in front of the hiring manager quickly. You're right about HR, 100%. It drives me crazy. Like, so often the person who's screening you from HR, and I'm not saying this to be, rude towards HR, but they have no idea about the job that you do very often. And so if you're relying on that person, and at least my experience, I'm curious what you've seen. I see a lot of times the person doing the screenings in HR is actually the youngest person,
Mm.
the least experienced HR person. And like in my case, this is going to sound ridiculous. I used to work for a company called Service Master, and they're a home services company. They own a lot of brands like Terminex, True Green, or at least they used to, Mary Maids, some really big name home services brands. Every time a really young HR person interviews me, they've never heard of any of those brands because they've never bought a house before.
Wow.
So it like kills me because if you could get in front of the hiring manager, they would know, and they would know it's a huge company, does billions of dollars in business every year.
Mhm.
But when you get someone who's never owned a house, like they just look at you like they have no idea what you're talking about. So um, I think that's all great. And I think you mentioned using LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my favorite resource. I recently interviewed Andrew Chimka from LinkedIn, and he talked about speed. You mentioned that. He talked about that too. They
Mhm.
have some data that shows the faster you can get, in front of the hiring manager, the faster you can apply, the more likely you are to actually get a job offer. So
Yeah.
speed is really important.
Can I add a couple of things to the
Yeah,
I'm glad we're talking about the human resources or the recruiter or the screener. And I'm not trying to be negative here. And they're doing their job, right?
right.
Their job is not exciting. I mean, their job is to say no to people. And their job is to screen people away so that when they go in front of a hiring manager, um, they are they have to put the best candidate, and sometimes they also get into trouble for screening and sending the right candidate, so they are very careful because of their fear of letting the wrong people in. They sometimes ignore the good people, the people who are fit. And I for the first 10 years of my career I was in sales, and anytime I would say 9 out of 10 times, because I had a good track record, 9 out of 10 times I had a conversation with the hiring manager, the person I would potentially work for, I had a good chance of getting hired. The challenge always become getting in front of them, right? So if you are a professional listening to this and you have experience, you're good at what you do, no matter what skill set or career, if you have the skills that the hiring manager wants to speak to you, because the hiring manager wants good people in their team. So the HR is that dilemma. Sometimes you have to go through them, but you don't have to if you find creative ways. The second thing I wanted to say is, almost every company I work for, there is a rule. If an internal employee gives their resume to HR or even the hiring manager, 9 out of 10 times they interview that candidate rather than you applying on a job. So think about this for a second. Like, even in the past, when someone in my company came and gave me a resume of a candidate, without even spending much details about the experience, I would say, yeah, bring him in. If you trust this person, I want to meet them. That happens a lot, and I've seen people actually getting hired like that. So don't forget, just connecting with the hiring manager, also see who else in the company you're connected to and leverage that relationship, because some companies even pay them for employee referrals.
Mhm. 100%. I think that's especially true, like, at tech companies. I mean, it's true at lots of companies, but I've seen a lot of tech companies that have a rule that if you get a referral, they will absolutely give you an interview.
Mhm.
Well, I'm curious, like, as you are doing sort of research into the career space and you're looking at, what's going on out there in the world, how many people do you estimate are applying for jobs online? Like, do you have a sense for how many people would apply to one given job posting?
So I can give you two examples from my own experience as recently as a hiring manager. So I've tried to hire salespeople and also people in my team, and I was running a marketing team. I used to get an average of 30 applications for those positions. And at the same time, uh, my CEO was hiring for a senior level executive, a VP of partnership. And he told me he got 200 applications and he only put out the job posting on LinkedIn. And I was really surprised. I said, I thought I would be getting more applicants. And sometimes based on the seniority, that could change. So it could be anywhere from 30 to 200 in my experience, what I've seen. And if you read a lot of advice out there, everyone throws out the number hundreds, and there's no real answer. It really varies. Um, it is a big range. I think, like I said, I've seen 30 to 200. I'm not surprised if it is within that range.
I think you're right. I actually had the same reaction that you just mentioned, like a while back when I was kind of observing numbers of people that were applying for things. My background is digital marketing. And I thought, like within digital marketing, you have director level positions, and then a step higher would be vice president. And I always thought, that you would probably get more applications for a director level because more people would be qualified to do a director level. But when I started digging into sort of the data, what I noticed was, at least at the time that I looked at this, there were about 10 times as many director jobs posted as vice president jobs because you need more of them. And so I suspect sometimes lower level jobs may have less total applicants because there are more choices versus, if you only have 10% as many VP jobs, more people are going to be going after those VP jobs. That's my only guess about that.
Wow, that's actually, I never thought about it that way, and it makes a lot of sense. Uh, yeah.
Well, I was just trying to figure it out. I started running some numbers to see, see what was out there. Yeah, so I think this is probably another really good argument for why you don't want to just rely on the regular online process, because if you are competing with hundreds of people, like how do you stick out to like you said, to like a robot? I mean, it becomes a game at that point.
And can I say it probably is going to get worse because now um, with the advent of AI, those robots are going to get more smart. And more and more companies, and it's also becoming more affordable for businesses. So there'll be more coming. So if a company is not using an applicant tracking system right now, my bet is that more companies will use it because it'll become more affordable. And I'll be honest, I've been on the other side. It's not fun hiring. Like that's one of all the things I did in my role. That's one thing I look forward to doing it least, but I needed to get someone. So the person on the other end is also desperate and they're also frustrated with the job search process. So I just wanted to put it out there. It's one of those things where it's not going to get easier. It's going to get a little bit more challenging because everybody's trying to find a solution.
Yeah, there is no great solution as far as that stuff goes, for sure. Well, I'm curious. One of the things that's totally my pet peeve is the bias that we see in the job search process. And I'm just curious, what kinds of biases are you seeing in the job search process today?
So it's an interesting question because first of all, I wanted to say, uh, I believe all of us have some type of subconscious bias on the outset. Like I listened to an interview you did with someone recently on this topic. The name of the guest is slipping my mind, um, but I think it was 2 episodes ago.
Hmm.
You had a lengthy discussion about bias, and you were mentioning about some people don't believe there's a bias, and I would say all of us have some type of inherent bias, and that could be based on what we have read, what we have experienced, cultural. So that's first thing I wanted to say. There is always some type of subconscious. Consciously we may not want to, we might think that we don't have it, but we all have it. So obviously things like gender bias, race bias, and all that, and age bias is very common, and I'm not an expert on this stuff. There's tons of information out there. So yes, these do exist. I want to talk about a couple that I have experienced, and I would say I've also been guilty of doing on the other end as a hiring manager. One of them is called location bias.
Oh
uh,
my gosh, please, yes.
so here's the thing. Like I know I have when I started my career, even until recently, I've commuted really, really long distance, and I know the toll it can take on some people. And eventually, the first thing they want to do is, oh my God, I want to find another job. So you end up as a candidate becoming a flight risk somewhat. So when I put out job applications, I've seen people applying from 90 minutes away, 2 hours away. On paper, except for the address, everything else looked great. But the first flag in my mind, oh God, if I even will this person even show up for the interview? Second of all, there's a good chance he or she is using this as a leverage to find something else, and he or she would use. No, this may not be true, but it does happen, right? Because people commuting is a big thing. As you can see now, everything is changing. People are getting more remote, telecommuting. People want to commute less. There's a reason a lot of young professionals want to move into the city. So it's even nobody wants to take a job, say yes, I want to commute more. Nobody. So that's something that exists, and we all have done it. And if you have not done it as a hiring manager, you're lying, because you are going to spend a lot of time hiring someone, and you want to reduce your risk of someone being a flight risk. That's number one. The second one I would say, and there's also bias towards people belonging to a specific group, and I'm not talking about ethnic group or something. It could be an alumni of of a university. Research in Motion, now it's BlackBerry. Back in the heyday, because the founders were from University of Waterloo, they gave uh, the first candidates they gave any choice were candidates from their alma mater. It made sense because the head office was there, they were there. So it became difficult for others who graduated from another university to apply for a job and get it, because it made it like a closed circle. So that happens a lot as well. People tend to hire people like them. So if someone is from a particular university, they know that they probably trust that university, and they will say, okay, if this person is from this place, there's probably a good chance they would be more successful, right? For same reason, people who even drop out of Stanford and Harvard, they get funds from VCs, because there's a high there's a history of those people succeeding. So, and there might be nothing based on truth, but there's always this bias. So those are the two that comes to my mind. And um, and depending on certain roles, there could be other bias as well. Like for example, in sales, which involves a lot of, in sales, you have to be good at communicating. So, of course, the first thing is your tone, the way you speak. And I remember when I first came to the country, Canada, I did have a heavier accent then. So I did. And one hiring manager was very straightforward. And he told me, listen, I don't want to be rude, but you would be calling people in the US, or you'd be calling people in the UK. And if you can't keep them on the phone, then you won't be successful. And that's one of the reasons we can't bring you on board. And yes, it did hurt at that time, but I didn't take it personally. I took it as a professional advice and started working on that. So it does happen. Trust me, there are certain professions that involve certain skills like communication. And if people sense that, not every hiring manager is going to be upfront and honest, because they do not want to hurt your feelings, but some will be upfront, like this particular one.
Wow, that feedback would really upset me if I received that feedback. I'm glad you were able to take it as something that you could use, but gosh, that I would not get over that quickly.
It was not easy at that time, I'll be honest, but it was important feedback. I realized I needed to speak slower. I needed to work on my pronunciation, and those skill set helped me in the future. So I'm a firm believer. Any setback is a good lesson for something positive in the future.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I can take out of that is I think there's times when we are being judged. Like, for example, this person could have judged you in this way and never told you, and then it wouldn't give you that sort of opportunity for growth. Um, I mean, I see that also within the US, like within, in a different way. Say when someone is, um, let's say they grew up kind of poor and they went through college, and they're maybe like the first person in their family to go to school, and they go out and they interview for jobs, and maybe they don't quite look the part, and no one has taken the time to talk to them about sort of the unspoken rules about, the hidden rules of how these things work, those are sometimes things that shouldn't matter. But until somebody shares it or until the person becomes enlightened in some way, they are going to be judged. And whether or not it's fair, it's happening. So it's hard to, I don't know. The one that you mentioned too that really got me was the location bias. And I don't mean necessarily an hour away or whatever, but I have seen a big bias for companies, even for high level roles. If you don't live in the city where they are located,
Mm.
even if you're willing to relocate, like it can be a deal breaker for them. And I just hate that. I wish they would be looking for the best candidate, not the best candidate within a 30-minute radius.
Yeah, you do bring up a good point there, and I wanted to touch on that because when we think about bias, I think we automatically judge employers and the hiring manager. It's part of us to look at their faults, but I also wanted to empathize with them a little. I'm not saying they are right, but think about hiring. I once interviewed someone on my podcast, and he said it takes 26 hours to hire a candidate. 26 hours in total, in terms of number of interviews, going through the process. So it does take a lot of time, and at the end of the day, no hiring manager wants to look really bad in the company. Imagine, it actually happened to me once. I hired someone, that person did not show up on the first day of work, and I looked at my boss and he looked at me disappointed, and I was really frustrated, and I had to go for and hire someone else. So a lot of times when the career coaching industry talk about this, we also forget the other part as well. So in the case of relocation, they might take, okay, if this, they might look at the risks of them not showing up, um, let's say they, or them changing their mind and all that. So, and that's up to the candidate to prove to them, saying, hey, listen, I know this is a risk, but I do want to cover that, uh,
Mhm.
how I can cover.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just, man, I think it makes the candidate, it really puts them at a disadvantage sometimes, and it can be a bummer. But I think to your point about the company, I almost think of it like they're buying insurance, like when they're kind of looking at averages. Like it's
Yeah.
almost like if you think about car insurance in the US, someone who's a 16-year-old male is going to be paying more for car insurance than a 40-year-old woman, because they expect that he's going to be more likely to wreck his car, especially if it's like a sports car.
Yeah.
Um, and when companies are hiring, they're sort of saying, well, on average, someone who is local or someone who has these name brands on their resume, they tend to work out on average.
Mhm.
Because it would require more work on the part of the company, but I would argue it's worth it because you have a lot of really great candidates who just are a little less traditional. There's one other thing you mentioned I think that's worth giving an example for, which is you mentioned about groups or things that we're associated with.
Mhm.
And I see this issue a lot in Memphis, where I live, when I look at resumes, because people will put things on their resume totally with great intentions. Like maybe they go to a certain church and they put that they lead the Bible study in the church, for example. And they're really proud of it and they want to show that they've got leadership skills and that they've done volunteer work. But then they may turn around and apply to a company like FedEx, which is headquartered in Memphis. And FedEx is a really international company and it's made up of people with all different views. And so I think as you're designing your resume and as you're sort of selling yourself, it's really important to keep in mind, um, work isn't always the place that you want to talk about some of those things, like your political or religious views. Like sometimes it's more important to get a job based on your professional skills. So I just think sometimes when I talk to folks, they have never thought about that, and I think it's worth thinking about because there is going to be a bias on the other side.
That actually brings up one of the biases I forgot to mention was a culture bias, and that's
Mm.
exactly what you're talking about. Like for example, and I think now this is very big right now, right? Every company claims to have their best culture, because it's now a candidate's market where candidates have more choices than employers. Like, I looked at the recent stat on CNBC. There are more un, unfulfilled jobs than candidates. I mean, that's that than people looking for jobs. It's amazing. So they try to lead with culture. The problem with that is the culture comes to the whole group think, where, let's say, I work in an environment where everything is very s- professional and strict, and everything is by the book, and someone comes by who seems very casual but is really good at the skill set. There's a good chance that person good gets rejected. And it could be the opposite. Let's say we have a culture where it's very open and people are swearing at work, and someone comes in who looks ultra conservative. There's a good chance that person could be not favored. And this is true. This is from examples and what I've heard and all that. So the culture bias is another thing. It's a form of group thing, because, well, let's say someone has worked for a company for 2 years. They tend to see that everybody who comes in should be like them, but they should be thinking otherwise. They should actually want people with different perspectives coming to the company, which makes it more refreshing. And that's another unconscious bias that people have. Actually, it's more conscious than unconscious, because they openly say that we want a good cultural fit. What they're trying to say is, oh, I want people who are like us. I want to hire people who are like us.
God, I
So
hate that. It's such my pet peeve. Yes, you're totally right. And it's just a good thing to keep in mind. I think these are all good. I mean, it almost sounds like we're complaining, but I think it's more of these are things to keep in mind when you're looking for a job, because they will impact you.
mhm,
And like if you go and apply for somewhere that is more casual and you come from a very corporate background, maybe try to tone it down a little bit for, for a casual company.
true.
I'm curious, we talked a little bit about non-conventional job searching. Tell me a little bit more, if we're trying to do something non-conventional, like if we don't want to just apply online, what are some other things that we can do?
I can share a story of someone I know who recently did this and was very successful. And then from the story, I'll tell you what I think was really good at that. So what he did was, he was a recent graduate. He had a degree which was not related to the field he wanted to get into. So he wanted to get into marketing. He wanted to work as in a company that does digital marketing. His experience was something else. I think his degree was in psychology or uh, political science. I don't remember. So what he did is, because first of all, he really wanted to get into marketing. So he built his own website. He started writing. He started showcasing it. So he built some type of experience. So instead of applying on job boards, what he did is he made a list of who he wants to work for. So he said, I want to work for marketing technology startups in Toronto. So he made a list about 10 to 20 of them. He sent out a LinkedIn invite to all the CEOs. He went right to the top of those small companies. And CEOs, it's easier to reach a CEO of a startup than CEO of JP Morgan Chase. Yes, that makes sense, right? So he reached out to them and he said, hey, I'm a young professional. I really love marketing. I want to pick your brains. Looks like you have a lot of experience in marketing and you build your career on this. Would you love to come? Can I pick your brains over a cup of coffee? I think his response rate was 20%. So 10, and that's not because people were ignoring. Probably a lot of people don't check their messages. And he ended up meeting one of the chief marketing officers and co-CEO of a company for coffee. Um, for the first half of the meeting, he picked their brains. Then towards the end, he actually said, listen, one of the second reasons I wanted to do is I really like what you do as a company, and I really would like an opportunity to interview. And he printed out some stuff, presented it to her, and she was like, wow, this is really impressive. And she went back to the office, spoke to her business partner, and invited him for an interview, and he got a job. And that's how he started in marketing. So that's one example, and I can give you other examples as well. The reason I say this, the story about this is the first thing people will really think of. The first thing that comes to people's mind when they listen to the story is like, oh yeah, he went directly to the CEO. He met them for coffee. No, actually, there's something else that was before that. He was really passionate about that field. He wanted to work in that field. He was not looking for a job. He was looking for a career in that field, nothing else. And that's really, really important. So before you go out and do that, and before you reach out to people, um, I think it's very important that A, you decide if that is where you want to work, and B, build some type of a portfolio or some type of experience, even if it is part-time. And some fields like marketing and developing and designers and developers, it is easier than others. Or even build some type of experience that you know that you want to get into this field. It'll make your life easier, because when I have screened candidates out, as soon as I sense they just wanted a job and did not really want to do the job, I screen them out. So that's one thing I want people to take away is, yes, you can do all the things and you can listen to hundreds of other stories like this, but that is number one.
Oh, absolutely. That's a really great example. I think people tend to get nervous about contacting other people that they don't know, but I think your story is a great example of the fact that it can work. And not everyone's going to respond, but you don't need everyone to respond.
Mhm. Exactly. Think about it this way, right? If you send out 100 applications, you probably get 5 interviews back. You send out 10 emails, you get 2 people responding back, which is a better ratio,
Right.
right? So if you're looking at time investment, this is a better ratio.
It's much better. It's much, much better. Well, so that actually kind of leads me into my next question, which is around career change and what we can do to rebrand ourselves. But it sounds like some of your suggestions in that area might be around, creating a portfolio or starting to get some experience. Is that kind of what you would suggest, or what would you suggest?
I would say experience is starting to trump education when it comes to job search right now. Companies are looking for experience, relevant experience. So lead with experience and examples. So I can share my own story. I started out I worked for 10 years in sales, and I was getting bored of it, and I wanted to get into marketing, and specifically I wanted to get into content marketing. So as I was working in sales in the evenings, I decided, okay, how do I learn this skill set? I don't want to pay for $10,000 to go to a college to get a digital marketing degree. Can I start learning right now? So I started a website, which is Career Metis. I started writing for a few years. Then the more I did it, the more excited I got, and I saw myself really working there full time. So the last company I worked for, I started out in sales, and I was helping them with other things outside of sales. And because it's a startup, you get the ability to do that. And then I know when the opportunity came, I presented to my boss, who was the CEO, saying, "Listen, this is what I do part time. This is what I've done for the company. I think I can really make a difference if you take me out of sales and put me in charge of demand generation. I can make a big impact." And I was able to rebrand myself, and I was able to get that job. And it was the best job I ever had. And the lessons from that story is going back to what I said 5 minutes ago. I really wanted to do it. I showed experience, like I showed intent first, then I showed passion, then I showed experience and examples. Then it made it easier for the other person to say yes. Um, as opposed to, let's say you just decided, okay, I want to be a someone listening to this is saying, "Oh, I want to be a marketer. I don't want to be working engineering anymore. Let me apply for marketing jobs." That is setting themselves up for failure if they don't provide any type of context as why they want to switch and how they're going to help the other company if they end up getting the job.
Hmm. I like that. I like that a lot, actually. I think you do have to kind of sort of take almost like a stair step approach to it. You can't. It's hard to get into like a totally new industry and a totally new career with sort of no, if you can't kind of build a story around it, if you don't have experience, like you kind of have to work into it.
Mhm. And be patient, right? Maybe you don't get it today, but maybe you get it 18 months from now. That's what happened to me. I made the decision, and it took me 3 years to get that job. But until then, I was still employed. I did not hate sales. I was not that excited about it. And so I eventually got it. But sometimes you just have to be patient. And that's something a lot of young professionals and job seekers do not think about, because everybody has this sense of urgency. They want it now.
Can I just tell you, I don't think anybody thinks about it because I talk to people of all ages and they assume they will come to talk to me and they'll say, Angela, I've applied to 10 jobs. I haven't gotten any of them. Clearly, I'm in the wrong field.
Hmm.
And sometimes they'll say, I think I should go back to college. I need a new degree. This is clearly not working for me. And my answer is you haven't applied yet to enough jobs or you haven't given it enough time. Um, so speaking of that, I'm curious if we're out there and we're applying for jobs, how many jobs should we be applying to at any particular time and why?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a definite answer for that. It really depends. Like some people suggest make a wish list of 50 companies that you want to work for and just apply to them. Some say apply for only 10 companies. Some say don't apply at all. It really depends on a scenario and what stage of your career you are in. Um, for example, if you're a young professional and like you just graduated, sorry, if you're a recent graduate and you don't have experience and you want that experience, you should apply to as many jobs as you can. And if you are someone at a director or VP level, you already have a niche experience. Maybe there's only 10 companies in that industry. Just apply to those 10 companies, right? So it really depends on that individual or where they are, what their career goals at that point of life they are at.
I agree. I think the thing to remember is that it's a numbers game and you can't assume you're going to have a fair shot to get every single job. So you've got to apply to a lot of jobs, especially if you really want to find a new one.
And I just want to add one more thing, Angela, is at the beginning I mentioned job boards are still valid. I actually am a firm, I track everything, and some people think I'm crazy. I have a spreadsheet when I was looking for jobs. I put in when I applied, who I applied to, when do I follow up, and all that. So when you what gets tracked, gets measured, gets improved. And if you've only applied for 10 jobs, like you're giving me an example, I know it's not enough. So when you have a system and a numbers game, I totally agree with that, then you're more likely to succeed than someone else who's just making it uh, a half-assed approach. And the second thing I want to say is if you don't have a job, if you're unemployed right now, finding a job should be a full-time job. And that's something I've seen a lot of people spend half an hour applying for two companies and the rest of the day watching Netflix, then they complain nobody's hiring me, is because they haven't taken the job search seriously. I know it sounds very sarcastic and funny, but it is true. I've seen a lot of people. And the first thing I say is you ought to take this seriously.
Yeah, 100%. Well, so if we feel like say we are unemployed and we're out there looking for a job and we feel like we've given it our best effort and nothing is coming through, I mean, what should we do?
So I would say there are two paths to take this. There is like first of all, I'm a firm believer that I know if you're unemployed and you have had a lot of rejections, it's hard to understand what I'm saying about to say right now. In terms of opportunities for employment or being successful, I think all of us are fortunate to be living in one of the best times in human history. There's a lot of opportunities, and you can create different paths. I'm an example of someone who has an engineering degree, then joined sales, worked in sales, then switched to marketing, and now I'm doing career medicine full time. So there's a so first thing I would say is if your goal is to work and you want to get a job, you like the corporate life, there's not then in that case you have to be persistent. You have to accept that yes, it is hard, and you also have to believe that what you have to offer to an employer is valid. And with that belief and mindset, you should keep applying, and you will be successful. There's a lot of people. I've not heard of anyone who has been unemployed for life. I mean, there are. I'm sorry, there are people, but the sheer the ratio is very small. Sometimes it might take you 3 months, sometimes it could take you a year, but you will get there. So keep just there are tons of other people before you who have actually done it, and they have actually become successful. They've got a job. So go to blogs like yours, Angela's website, the podcast. There are tons of other websites where they share stories about people who have got jobs. Everyone has struggled. So you're not alone. Don't give up. Be persistent. That's number one. The second thing I would say is maybe you want to try a different approach. Maybe you definitely need to make an income and you can't wait. So there are other sources. You could take up you could participate in the gig economy. That's one way to build your skill set, make some income. And then using that, you can go back as an example to leverage that in your job search. So let me give you an example. So let's say an engineer wanted to be a marketer. He or she has no experience. They can go to a website like FlexJobs or Upwork, apply for some positions, get a couple of contracts. Then they have a portfolio. Then they can either go back to the same companies and say, "Hey, listen, I've worked on a few projects. Do you think you can hire me for full time?" Or go back to the job market and say, "Listen, look at this portfolio. I've done this part time. I want to do this full time. Talk to me." So there are many, many ways. I can talk about 5 hours on this, and I know I want to be respectful of the time. So don't give up. There's always hope. There's always position. There's always a way out. Just don't stop the process.
Perfect. This is so helpful. Well, this has been wonderful. Where can we go to learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. My full name is Nissar Ahamed. You can connect with me. I'm very active there. Or you can always go to careermetis.com. My email is nissar@careermetis.com. And I respond to most, or if not all, the emails. So those are the best ways to reach me.
Oh, well, Nissar, thank you so much for joining me. This has been great.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share these ideas.
And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode today, please don't forget to help me out. Go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to the show. The more subscribers we have, the easier it is for other people to find the show.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.